The air in Pine Ridge always had this eerie, damp chill, but that day, it felt heavier than usual. I remember how fog clung to the trees as we walked to that little antique shop on the edge of town. The whole place smelled like musty wood and old paper, the kind of smell that makes your spine tingle. We were just looking for some random junk, maybe a creepy souvenir or two. But then, Drew pulled an old, dusty book off one of the top shelves. The cover was faded, barely legible, but the title sent a chill through me, The Forgotten Rooms of Hollow Creek. Gabe laughed, brushing it off as some spooky urban legend, but I noticed the shopkeeper watching us from behind the counter, her eyes wide, almost like she wanted to snatch the book from us and burn it. She shuffled over, her wrinkled hand trembling as she whispered, "You don't want to mess with that place. Hollow Creek, it's not empty like folks think." "Come on, it's just an abandoned asylum," Finn said, smirking. "Perfect for some creepy photos and a couple of jump scares, right?" Her expression turned serious, almost scared. "That place, those rooms, they're not for the living. The Forgotten Rooms aren't just some dusty old cells. They're places meant to hold what couldn't be helped." That only fueled our curiosity. The warnings, the mystique, it was exactly the kind of thing that would get people's attention online. Gabe, ever the skeptic, joked about finding cursed patient selfies inside. And before I knew it, we were all nodding, the thrill of exploring something real, something forbidden, tingling in the air. But as we walked out of the shop, I swear I heard her whisper, "The asylum doesn't forget those who enter." The asylum was more imposing than we'd imagined, looming out of the fog like it had been waiting for us. Its windows were shattered, empty black holes staring down, and the front doors hung crookedly, swaying with the wind's eerie groan. We paused at the entrance, but the thrill kept us moving forward. Inside, the air was thick, carrying a sickening mix of mildew and decay. Every breath felt heavy, like the building was closing in around us. The halls twisted and turned in ways that felt wrong, and each corner seemed to echo with faint footsteps, or maybe just our imagination. Rusted metal beds lined the walls, some still with the cracked, yellowing restraints attached. Gabe cracked a joke about the decor, but I could hear the tension in his voice. Every wall seemed to hum with something unspoken, as though the building itself had absorbed the suffering that once filled its rooms. As we ventured deeper, Drew stumbled upon a narrow door hidden behind a pile of fallen beams. It led down a cramped staircase, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. A sick feeling crawled over me as we descended. Something about this passage felt wrong. At the bottom, we entered a dim corridor. The walls were lined with scratched-up cell doors, each with a little metal slot just big enough for someone to peek through. These were the Forgotten Rooms. On an old metal table, we found a stack of decaying files and a journal, probably left by a nurse long ago. Flipping through it, we saw entries describing exorcisms, strange rituals the staff had tried on patients who heard voices or saw shadows. The nurse wrote of screams that seemed to seep through the walls, of patients claiming to be trapped inside their own minds by something far darker than insanity. Then, one entry caught my eye. Her handwriting was frantic, like she'd scribbled it in a rush. "The spirits are bound here. They're waiting for someone, anyone, to take their place so they can escape." I dropped the journal, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. And in that suffocating silence, I swore I heard someone, or something, whisper my name. Night had settled in, and the silence inside Hollow Creek was absolute. We'd set up a little camp in what used to be the lobby, but everything felt wrong. Even the air tasted stale, like it hadn't been touched in decades. It wasn't long before the first signs of something off began to creep in. It started with whispers. Low and faint, almost blending in with the wind that rattled the broken windows. But these whispers sounded like voices, overlapping, coming from the depths of the hallway. I shivered, telling myself it was just the building playing tricks on us. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold, unnatural brush against my arm, like fingers grazing my skin. I spun around. No one was there. Only the empty corridor, stretching out, filled with shadows that seemed darker than the night. Drew's flashlight started flickering, the beam jumping erratically across the walls. For a split second, I saw what looked like faces etched into the peeling paint, faces twisted in expressions of pure agony, eyes hollow and staring right at me. I gasped, backing up, but by then, Drew had already noticed them too. He muttered something under his breath, shaking the flashlight as if that would somehow make it all disappear. We tried to laugh it off, but fear was crawling up all our spines. Each step we took seemed louder, almost like someone was following right behind us, matching our pace. Then Finn stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide with terror, pointing down the hall. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing perfectly still at the end of the corridor. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its eyes, they were just empty, hollow sockets, watching us, waiting. We bolted, desperate to leave, but every turn led us somewhere unfamiliar. The asylum was changing, twisting itself like a labyrinth to trap us inside. Doors appeared where there should have been walls, and the hallways stretched endlessly, every path leading us deeper and deeper into the darkness. My heart pounded as I realized the asylum wasn't just a building. It was alive, and it had us exactly where it wanted us. It was like something had taken over Lila. One minute, she was herself, shivering like the rest of us, whispering about how we should have never come. The next, she was standing eerily still, murmuring words we'd never heard, her voice low and raspy. The words sounded familiar, then I realized they were the exact lines from the nurse's journal. "Lila?" I called, but she didn't answer. When she turned to face us, her eyes were hollow, void of anything familiar. It was like looking into the eyes of someone long dead. "Please, let us go," she whispered in that strange, chilling voice. The temperature dropped so fast, our breath turned to mist, and the air filled with this awful smell, like burnt hair and decay. None of us dared to move. Gabe finally snapped out of his stupor, stumbling back, muttering about finding another way out. He wandered down the hall in a panic, and we followed close, our only thought to get as far from Lila as possible. He found an old door and yanked it open, revealing a room with padded walls, leather restraints hanging from rusty hooks. A table in the center was covered with dusty letters, the pages worn and faded. He picked one up, his hands shaking, and read it aloud, his voice cracking. "Please, free me from the voices in the walls. They call to me, they want me to stay." Each letter was worse than the last, full of desperate pleas from patients who had heard things, seen things they couldn't explain. They hadn't been crazy, they'd been haunted, driven to madness by the spirits trapped in these walls. I felt hands, cold, ghostly hands, brushing against my back, my shoulders, like they were pulling me in, trying to drag me down with them. Every sound, every flicker of light, felt like a taunt, like they were laughing at us, feeding off our terror. And as we tried to find an escape, the halls stretched endlessly, the walls whispering, pulling us deeper and deeper into the heart of Hollow Creek. I don't remember when I started running. All I know is we were bolting through the hallways, the walls twisting around us like some kind of sick maze, laughing at us, trapping us. Lila stumbled, falling to her knees, clutching her head and muttering something that sent chills through me. "They're hungry, they're waiting, they'll never let us go." Her voice was so faint, like it was being drowned out by 1,000 whispers. We tried every door. The ones we'd come through, now locked tight. The windows? Covered in grime, boards nailed in place as if the asylum was sealing us in, making sure we didn't escape. Gabe kept hitting his phone screen, hoping for a signal, but the battery had drained, just like the rest of ours. It was as if the asylum itself wanted us here, wanted us to join its collection. In a blind panic, we tore through more corridors, praying one would lead us out. But each turn just pulled us deeper. Shadows darted in the corners of my vision, disappearing the second I tried to look. Every sound, footsteps that weren't ours, low, guttural whispers, something dragging along the floor behind us. The asylum had swallowed us whole, and there was no escape. Days later, the townsfolk found just one thing, Mia's phone, lying outside the asylum gates. The screen was cracked, but somehow it had recorded hours of footage. The audio was barely comprehensible, faint voices, desperate cries, whispers in some old language none of us knew. Shadows moved in the background, twisting, crawling, almost as if they were watching, taunting us. But there was no sign of us, not a single trace. The asylum had taken us, and it wasn't giving us back. Now, Hollow Creek sits in the fog like it always has, silent and waiting. Some say if you listen on misty nights, you can still hear the echoes, the laughs, the screams, the faint cries of those who went in and never came out. The locals know better than to get close. Hollow Creek Asylum has its grip on this place, and its spirits are always hungry for more.